Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is a great opportunity to talk about the last 14 years. It's also a great opportunity to talk about what we're going through right now. And of course, we're going to hear from Hala in a bit, but I thought maybe I will just start with what I'm hearing in the market, the COVID situation, and let's get kind of establish our rules right now. You know, the first question that everybody is asking is, what's going on? When are we going to recover? When does the new normal start? And they brought out all letters of the alphabet. They brought out the letter V. Is it a V shape? That's a good question. They brought out the letter U. They brought out the letter W, i.e. it's a double dip. You know, we'll go back into a lockdown a second time. They brought down the letter L. It's a long recession. And also there's the fat U. But the reality, and we heard this a few times, a lot of analysis has gone into this, is that it's going to hit a bottom, and then there's going to be a slow return back to basics. You know, everybody has to get back to work. It's not going to be easy to get back to work, to get the systems rolling, to get the supply chains running, to get all the logistics, to get all the workers back onto ground. So the economies will re-establish, and they'll have a slow curve back up. But that has a meaning for all of us. We've had 20, 30 years, most of us probably on this call, most of your working careers, you've had high growth, very high growth for the last 20, 30 years in different markets. May not be in your own markets, may not be in your own space, but the markets have grown substantially. We have a potential 2-3 years when the markets, GDP, etc., is going to come slowly back to its norm. That has many implications for us. So when you have a slow curve, we have to find ways to go. Sorry, just gonna dismiss what's blocking me. We need to find ways to go above and innovate above. We cannot do incremental return stuff anymore. So all of us who are founders, all of you who are driving entrepreneurship, think about the non-incremental, think about what technologies are going to really have a major impact. So this is where we come back and say, you're revolutionists, you're liberators, you are the front line, you are the guys taking the financial risk, the organizational risks, and the physical risks. So what we expect, the new normal, is going to be driven by the very people that are driving these entrepreneurships. So first point, you will define the new normal in terms of the way we work, in terms of the way supply chains work, the way data analytics is done, in the way you're organized, in the way you collaborate, in the way you track, and the way you monitor, even the way you teach. I think you're going to drive that new normal, and let's make that new normal relevant. You're going to change the frictions that we have. Today, there's a lot of frictions, whether it's in cash. So all of you fintech guys out there, you're changing that, removing cash from the equation. In the way we move, all of you mobility guys out there, or the lack of mobility in the way we work, how can we work from home? How can we use these Zoom-like scenarios? And in the way we make decisions, that's quite big. Agility is key. Most of us are tired of the slow political and hierarchical organizations. How can we move faster? And most important of all is what we call the double bottom line. Is profit all that we focus on? Is the future of finance about profit? Or are we going to be moving into a second sustainable layer where the talent and capital is shifted towards a new thing? Whether it's the green revolution, whether it's women and workforce diversity, all forms of this. I'm a finance guy. I do believe there's too much capital allocated towards financial and legal people. I think it needs to go towards engineers, those who move. And this is your chance. So to do all of that, we need a lot of lobbying support. We need a lot of institutional support. We need a lot of networking. We need a lot of brand associations. And we have Hala, chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum, who has been doing that for us for the last 14 years. And Hala, we'd like to hear from you how that's working, what's been the impact of the last 14 years, and what do you see happening now?
Thank you, Kushal. welcome to everybody on this call, on this event, on this live event. I guess we're going to be having a lot of those in the coming future and probably for the coming years as we're defining the new normal. I take this opportunity to invite you all on June 24th at 4 p.m. for the virtual final award ceremony of the MIT Arab Startup Competition. I know many of you have been wondering if this will take place this year. We were set to take place in Abu Dhabi, but unfortunately or fortunately, we're doing this online now. So waiting for you all on June 24th at 4 p.m. This is an event with our partner Community Jamil, but also Kaust, Zain, Roland, Berger, Flat 6 Labs. So as Kushal mentioned, we proudly have again this year this report, the Arab Entrepreneurship Maturity Index, Insights and Forecasts that we have developed proudly with Roland Berger. And this report has a lot of information that I'll share the highlights of the report with you, and then maybe I'll tell you if anything from this report will be disrupted in the current context of the Arab region and of the world in general. So first of all, the few highlights of this report. After 14 plus years of MIT Arab Startup Competition, and thanks to all the partners, and I can see names of them on this call, and all the community around the MIT Enterprise Forum Arab Startup Competition that has grown quite immensely over the past few years, we've been able to contribute to the creation of 15,500 jobs. And this has increased by 12% compared to the 2018 numbers. So in 2019, 15,500 jobs were created thanks to the MIT Enterprise Forum Arab Startup Competition, and that's a significant increase year on year. This initiative has contributed for $460 million to the GDP of the Arab region, $1 million of a contribution to the GDP of the region. Every entrepreneur that has graduated from this competition was able, on average, to raise $420,000 to start their initiative, and those $420,000 were for about 80% coming from institutional investors. So these were not people who were bootstrapping themselves or tapping onto friends and family money. This is money coming from investors. Overall, the valuation of the startups that were created thanks to this initiative is about $1 billion. So that's quite a large amount for the region. And we were able to attract in 2019 alone, 27 million in foreign direct investment into the region. So these are international VCs putting money into the startups of this initiative. So I think these numbers are kind of heartwarming given the context that we're listening to. And of course, everybody has in mind, is this going to be challenged by the current context? So my optimism will say that despite the current context, I see two great opportunities for innovative companies and technology companies that apply to this initiative, but for startups in the region in general. So the first piece of good news is that despite the economic difficulties that this COVID crisis has created, one thing is sure is that it has accelerated technology trends and technology adoption and the digitization of the economy. So this means, I mean, if we look at what companies remain solid through this crisis, it's the technology companies. So this means that the opportunity for the startups and the innovative companies in our region to perform and to stay alive, because it's about staying alive these days, And to navigate through this crisis and emerge stronger after this crisis is much, much higher than traditional businesses coming from conventional sectors. So that's the first piece of good news. The second piece of good news, as we look at the economic context, and not just the COVID situation, but the oil prices are down. So this creates an additional hurdle for a region that's very much dependent on oil prices. And if we look at special situations like Lebanon and the financial crisis that's taking place in Lebanon, so that there are kind of a double hurdle in the region: COVID plus oil prices, or COVID plus the financial crisis in Lebanon. But if you think about it, all these crises are somehow, so they're bad for the economy in general, but they're better for companies that are technology companies and innovation, because they will force governments and the economic sector in general to rely more on technological solution and on innovation to survive. We all need to rethink the way the economy was done, to rethink supply chains, to rethink what's produced locally versus what's produced outside. And this leaves enormous opportunities for an entrepreneur or for innovation to play a role. And as Kushal mentioned as well, it creates also immense opportunities for social entrepreneurs to solve the very many problems that are emerging through this crisis. So yes, it is very difficult times, but at the same time, bright minds like our participants should be able to continue seizing those opportunities, because now is the time to innovate and to come up with new solutions, and hopefully we'll come up next year with numbers. I'm not sure if they would have increased, but let's aim at stabilizing these numbers in terms of job creation and contribution to the regional GDP.
Thank you. And I think it goes even beyond that. Without these enterprises, this special situation we're in, most governments would not have been able to cope with without the little frontliners that we have out there that are doing the courier services, that are providing the restaurants with the ability to deliver food, with the ad tech, with the health tech, with all of the key support systems that have been put into place, which are pure technology driven. We wouldn't have survived. I think these countries would have had a revolution which would have been damning, to be fair. So technology and all of you entrepreneurs have actually been the saviors of the current situation. So if we go back to maybe 6-7 years ago, I remember I was helping a very large company in Kuwait think about how to innovate, etc. And they turned to this MITEF and considered, okay, what is MIT? What is the approach? How do we bring that approach into the corporate? And then following that, maybe if you take the last 5 years, you've seen what's happened in Bahrain with the startup Bahrain, with BDB, with Al-Waha. You take what's happened in the UAE with DFF, with Sherar, with ADGM, with Hub 71, what's happening in Saudi with MISC, Munshat, SVC, JADA, Ministry of Investment, in Egypt, etc. Many of these are following what had happened many years ago in Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. So they're learning from adaptation of the engineering skills, from the technologies, from the entrepreneurial support, and trying to diversify these oil economies. And they've done quite a lot to put money into play, to put systems into play, to put new legal structures into play. But in the last 3 months, 6 months, I think we've got a little bit of a question mark. Are they doing enough? And what can we do to push them harder? What do and we're gonna perhaps from a poll perspective, request all of you out there to say, what support do you need? Of course, beyond financing, what support do you need from these governments? And how can we push them towards that? So do you see, Hala, enough being done by the regional politicians?
Yeah, so while we answer this question, maybe I'll ask Rami or Maya to start a poll question with our audience to see, although I kind of guessed the answer to that, are governments doing enough to support SMEs and startups in the current context? I'd love to have a raise of hand onto that question. Because, you mentioned something really important, Kushal. It's, if we enter into the granularity of what's happening in the Arab region, you have countries often led by government, but also sometimes led more by successful entrepreneurs that are performing really well when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship. And if I look at the impact report we've shared, you can see that countries like Egypt, that represents 23% of the population of the region, is overrepresented in our competition, with 32% of applications coming from Egypt. And we can say that this overparticipation is from Egypt is not coming from a government-led initiative to promote entrepreneurship. It's Egyptian entrepreneur. It's a grassroots movement, successful Egyptian entrepreneurs that have inspired others into this route. So Saudi also is emerging as having more participants into the competition. So this arguably is somehow government-led. Lebanon is, I would say, partly government-led, and the other part from inspiring entrepreneurs, with 11% of the total submission coming from Lebanon, whereas Lebanon, I would guess, would be below 5% in terms of representation of the population of the region. It would be interesting to see how Lebanon also would perform next year, given the current context. And if we look at the economic crisis and its impact globally, you can see many governments that have special programs to support SMEs and companies with less than 10 employees in terms of paying for their salaries during this time of crisis, or doing special loans. I'm just wondering why no government is coming up with this type of support, especially for innovative SMEs and for the vital sectors in the region.
I think they used to have this KPI called desk acreage, right? So governments wanted to fill as many desks as possible and say, we've got startups and we've got a lot of employees. Now I think that KPI needs to change to ensuring that they're protecting and supporting and actually focusing on those winners. I think we're going to see a lot more winners and losers. One of the things I feel really bad about is everybody talks about the amazing Karim story, but what's happened post letting Karim go to the international, let's say to Uber, Karim being taken over by Uber, is Uber took a dramatic decision to be fully focused on financials. They don't have any reason to protect the employees in the region, and they will crash them on a pure commercial basis. How do we ensure that we've got all the support we need here locally to create local champions, to ensure that there is enough ring fencing of those local champions? They still have to make financial sense, but given that double bottom line, given the fact that we do need the technical skills locally, we don't want to export all these amazing Egyptians to the US and Germany and other countries. We don't want to transport our engineers, brain drain issues across the world. We want to attract, not lose them. So how do we provide that protectionism, and what role can we play to drive that? I would love some support there from also from the MITEF.
Yeah, Kushal, I think that's an important point, and I would like maybe also to go back to what you were saying earlier about the world after this crisis, and whether the impact of oil prices or the financial crisis in Lebanon or the COVID situation. I'd like also to launch maybe another poll to the audience to ask them if they personally whether for their business or on their personal life, we go back to life as usual after this crisis, because there's an opportunity there. And we were mentioning in our conversation offline with Kushal, this extraordinary op-ed that Muhammad Yunus wrote a few days ago about the zero ROI concept and the importance of social entrepreneurship, and maybe our opportunity today to either go back to the world as it was before or to change a few things. And I'd be curious to see if you personally would go back to life as usual, or if there's anything you would change to the way you do business or to the way you behave. Maybe I'll put a link to that article here so that we also look at that.
I think I'd love to comment on that. Being, Roland Berger as a consultancy, when we go to our clients, our average, and I'm talking pre-COVID, our average travel and expenses spend used to be somewhere in the 15 to 20% of what we charge of the total fees. That's a substantial, let's say, friction in the economy, which was because you have to be face-to-face, because you have to go through the commute route of Beirut to Saudi or Dubai to Saudi with very expensive flights on the typical Sunday to Wednesday night or Thursday. So these are things that many of you will have seen, and that's friction. That's friction in for the country, friction for the economy, friction for the environment, friction for our own social life, etc. And we've seen that during this time, COVID time, everybody can work very easily from home. The clients are actually quite comfortable. We can communicate well. Is there a need to go back to that normal? Is there a need to go fully back to that normal? No way. I can't see that happening. I can see that at least 50% will turn around, and that saves at least 10% on everybody's fees from in my field. Again, if you take that across the world, that's a pretty substantial saving in time, in money, in the social and human capital that creates.
Yeah, so I was just looking at the polls now, and I can see that on the government question, there's an overwhelming response towards no, not really government, or not doing anything. And that's about 60% of the votes, and about an additional 34% are like split. They're doing, but not enough. So I would say that overall 90% of the people surveyed say that governments in the region are not doing enough.
Maybe I give a special story from a close friend of mine, which is an example. He's based in Turkey. Over the last 10 years, we left our old firm together about 11 years ago. Him and his wife created, which is the biggest now, let's say, e-commerce company in Turkey. I wouldn't give the name, but many of you can quickly Google that. And in that period, that company has gone from about doing a few $1 million in the first year to about $20 million in the second year, to about $1 billion 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, to $5 billion today. That's a very substantial sum of money. For a Turkish company where 95% or 99% of the staff is local, where 99% of the ingredients that they're selling is locally produced. So it's pretty much a Turkish company. However, politics, global politics around how to tax the technology companies, if you're a Google or a Facebook, you expect to be taxed now in whichever country. I think France recently put a very large tax on, I think that was Facebook or Google, I don't remember, and on Apple. So we do see that big successes will expect to get taxed locally, and they will be seen as an international company. So he's seen as a Chinese company, despite being fully local. So how do we ensure that each of you is localizing, each of you is getting the support of being in your country or in the region, being seen as doing the right thing for the country and producing what you just did for the last 3 months, a huge success story in the COVID period, and not get taxed for it and not get hit for it and actually get the right support. We think that's where these lobbying organizations sit. We're there, we're championing this because there's no other way of driving this behavior change at the government level.
Yeah, so I'm looking at questions, and we have one question from Hamad Afifi from Egypt, who's asking about seed round fundraising. And I think that's a very important question, because I can tell you that as an investor, investing in companies that are a bit more advanced, that have already traction, is an easier play today in terms of investing, rather than taking a bet on a early stage company that's raising a seed round and for which we have little visibility in this context. So I would say that it really depends on what sector you're in. So if you're in a sector that benefits from the current context, so I'm thinking, for example, I have a cybersecurity company out of Lebanon that has been doing really well because there's an overwhelming demand for increased cybersecurity today, because of all the remote work that we're doing and all these passwords that are left and right. So we need to secure all that. So they're doing well. So I would say that if you're in a sector that's benefiting from the current context, then yes, you can still try and find investors. I think they would be willing to invest in such sectors around maybe healthcare, cybersecurity, and software services in general that are doing well in the current context. If you're in a sector that is not doing so well in the current context, let's say the hospitality sectors or other similar sectors, I would wait and try to put a hold on your concept until we have more visibility, because even if you raise now, how are you going to create traction to be able to be ready for your next round? So I would try to keep cost minimal and maybe raise later, or raise whatever is needed to survive through this crisis and reset, or maybe find a way to pivot a bit so that you can create traction faster. So
maybe I can add some valuation discussions as well. So I've been angel investing in the region for about 7-8 years. About 7 years ago, a good concept would come to our table at seed stage, valuing themselves at roughly $1 million. That was the typical number that one would ask for and say, hey, we're looking for somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 to help take this beyond the seed stage. And then as time progressed, by last year, the average valuation ask was closer to $3-4 million for a seed stage. So it's shifted almost 300% in that period. I think one thing for sure is we have to reset what is the right number. You know, although there is no right number, depending on what your concept is, inflation has also its problems because it chases money out. And I think money is going to be much more selective. People are also going to be much more selective. So getting the right people, getting the right money is critical. Getting your valuations. If somebody's offering you money and the discussion is about valuation, I would accept a lower valuation at this stage. Don't be afraid of down rounds. Don't let your previous investors anchor you down. Don't expect that people are going to make decisions easily now. So you have to be persistent. You have to be tough. Less is more. Last longer, and be quite nimble. So
we have another interesting question from, I think, one of your former colleagues, Alessandro Brondo. And his question is, he's seen a lot of opportunistic credit debit funds raised in the US and Europe, Carlyle and CVC, following the COVID-19 outbreak, and will we see the same in the Middle East? So, I mean, looking at that, I would say that there was an interesting article about the credit ratings of private companies in the current sector, in the current context, and there's a lot of leverage that has taken place a lot of debt financing that has taken place in private companies in Europe and in the US because of the interest rate levels over the past few years. And as cash is becoming scarce in these companies, obviously private equity firms are seeing opportunities to get these companies at a cheaper price, maybe hoping for distressed levels in terms of cash flow for these companies. I don't know if the level of leverage was the same in the region. I would suspect it wasn't as high, simply because interest rates were not as low. And maybe it's a bit less in the culture, and private equity have not been hugely active in the region anyway. But one thing is sure is that there will be opportunities to buy businesses in the region at much lower valuation, especially if we're looking at the hospitality sector and maybe the airline sector, although most of them are not private in the region. So all these sectors create opportunities for buyouts in the current context, and prices will go down. Now, don't let these valuation negotiations affect your business if you're doing well and you have a good cash position. I think today more than ever, cash is king. And if you're a startup, try, or even a company, try, and I'm sure you're already doing it, to save your cash as much as possible and to lower fixed costs and remove non-essential things. And we could say in a world of remote work that rent has become a non-essential spend for companies. So maybe I mean, reduce as much as you can. And maybe just going back on one point about the governments and the support of governments in terms of paying salaries in this time of crisis, I would like to salute the effort of all the employees of startups that, and I know firsthand that many of them have accepted to either divide their salaries by half or postpone their salary payment. So that's really true entrepreneurship behavior coming from startups and other companies, not just startups. And I think this is something that we see in the Middle East, but that we would hardly see in any other part of the world, where people would actually go to the streets if they wouldn't get their salary at the end of the month and if the government doesn't pay it. So I really salute this effort, and I think this is very typical of our region.
I think maybe it's a story, Alejandro. There's a story worth bringing up here. It's the Fetcher story. So when Fetcher grew through its time, it grew what was in the old days we called a hyper growth venture funding. So you fund the business to grow as fast as possible. You take it to the last mile, burn the cash as fast as possible, and knowing that there's always somebody with deep pockets coming in at a higher valuation to take you forward. This was the SoftBank model. That's of course taken a big hit about a year and a bit ago once the WeWork bubble bust. And that's sent its waves all the way here. So the Fetcher bubble bust, there are many others that are in a similar space where there has been a rethink about what's the right valuation, what's the right model. Don't chase your growth ahead of your ability to fund it. So let the cash last as long as possible is quite key, number one. Number two, there have been some funds, some credit funds that have come in to take in a position. So in that particular case, Gateway came in, took a position at a much lower valuation, restructured, and it's now rebasing it to grow again. That's let's call it the private equity approach. At the government level, in France and Germany, there's probably about 2 billion euros that has been provided as loan money to most of the startups in this last 2 months. And they've provided it at very easy and fast-paced movements. A lot of the region here is thinking about how to do that. How do we get that money to the startups? So, for example, in Saudi Arabia, there was roughly 2.4 billion issued to the Social Development Bank to promote to the SMEs. The only problem is how will it go into the hands of the SMEs and startups? That's still being worked. I think all the fund of funds, all the sovereign funds are also thinking about how to bring debt to the market and how to bring debt, which doesn't exist as an instrument for startups. It exists once you're bankable, but it doesn't exist to most startups. So, but that's under discussion now.
Yeah, we have an interesting question from Carl Nasser saying, while working remotely on a permanent basis, even after COVID might cut costs, as mentioned, wouldn't the workspace lose some positive aspects, such as meeting with people and working in groups? I think the broader question here is, how do you create a company culture if you're working remotely, and what kind of company culture do you want to be able to continue working remotely? And this is very interesting. I don't know what kind of culture you create. All I know is that the values around entrepreneurship that we're promoting through this initiative will be more and more required. Being autonomous in your work and also a team player, but a spontaneous team player as opposed to a forced team player, to spontaneously go and share the result of your work with your team, although they're not around the corner in your office, but they're just a phone call away or a Zoom away. The learning, and how do you continue learning if you don't spontaneously see your colleagues? So of course we'll be losing some of that. I think the answer to that, as usual, and we could see it through education, if some of you have children that go to school, the answer to that is probably a blended world where you still have offices, but not necessarily big enough to fit everybody, but big enough to have meetings for groups or smaller groups, and at the same time work remotely. So I guess the answer to continue creating this culture and valuing face-to-face meeting is to have maybe a blended approach to remote work, where you work from home, but you also work from the office.
I think Jeff Bezos has a very interesting rule, which he calls the 2 pizza rule, which is there should be no meeting which requires more than 2 pizzas to feed everybody in that meeting. So effectively, eventually all projects, all teams should be able to come together and feed out of 2 pizzas, which probably means less than 10, 12 people in any one time. So you can have a company of 100, but when you get together, do the 100 people have to all get together at the same time?
So we have also an interesting question from Munira Halabi saying, what's the future of direct-to-consumer investments, and I would say B2C investments in the current context? I think that's really a challenging question. I think, again, the answer is it depends, what type of B2C. You have B2C in healthcare, for example, the likes of the Peloton bikes and all the testing to monitor your health. And so I think this will be a tremendous opportunity in the future because of increased awareness around health and this. But then you could see other B2C initiatives that could be challenged. So B2C travel, you could argue also that B2C fashion and retail, I wonder what this sector will look like as there are fewer events. And, I take it for me, I just don't think of what I'm going to wear when I wake up and go on a Zoom call the same way I do if I go to the office. And and all that goes with it. So I think a lot of the lifestyle B2C initiatives will have to rethink themselves. The things around food will have tremendous growth, but it depends also on how they're positioned. So I guess a lot of the B2C concept will have to rethink their life after COVID and after this crisis.
I don't remember the statistics properly, so I'll try to remember them. It was in the FT about 2 days ago. in the UK, Barclaycard announced that they looked at the average wallet spend April 2020 versus April 2019 and said there was a 97% decline in spend on entertainment, pubs, and going out. And there was a 50% increase in entertainment relating to digital forms, so the Netflix and Angamis of the world. So effectively, what's happening is the direct-to-consumer on the digital side, whether it's ordering something e-commerce-wise or downloading a movie, etc., has substantially increased. The only question is, how can you get your marketing spend out there? There's 400 million Arab consumers out here. How do we get access to them? How much spend is there? Who is taxing that spend? Is it Google, Facebook, etc.? So how do you ensure that your marketing costs are kept low?
Yeah, so I go back to questions. I have two interesting questions, and before looking at them, I'd like also to salute whoever is joining from Jordan and also from Iraq. We have, I forgot to mention that we have increased representations from Iraq also this year. And I mean, Jordan has always been at the top of the list in terms of participation. So I'd like to salute these people. So two very interesting questions. One from my friend Hoda Hossi from Tunis, who's saying, with no more random meetings, what is the future of networking? So a bit related to what we said before, but I would like to answer this a bit more specifically. So today, I think the statistic goes as 40% of couples in the US today met online. I was attending a conference online 3 days ago where there were 900 attendants, and there was a networking room where I just had to wait, and randomly I got someone to network with. And I have to say, it's the new way of networking. I really welcomed that because I didn't know who to expect. So it's kind of a surprise thing. I think, sometimes at live events, you could feel awkward in networking sessions, especially if you're not particularly hyper social, like wondering who you're going to be chatting with, who's you're going to be your next conversation. Thank God I have my phone in case I'm alone. Whereas here online, in fact, everything is simplified with those, chats or live meetings. You start chatting with someone because you like their comments, and in a side room you can have a video with them to meet them. So I guess it has opened interesting opportunities for new ways to network and to meet people online first. Before maybe following up with a physical meeting, whereas we used to meet people physically first and then follow up with online stuff. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Well, one of the greatest launches ever happened 2 weekends ago in Fortnite. So Travis Scott came on like a god figure, how big, and he launched his album. It was a 10-minute, I think, session, which attracted about 30 million viewers to date. So 30 million viewers watched him inside Fortnite, and people were talking to each other. They were getting onto stage, and it was all virtual. The whole thing was virtual. And that whole esports, e-gaming arena where people spend so much time with each other. I even remember when the kids get back home, and and this is even pre-COVID times, they straight away put on their headsets and they start talking to each other immediately. And they're not using Fortnite to play, they're using Fortnite to talk to each other. Those were virtual games. If some of you want to look up what Match.com is doing, these are the guys behind
meeting online.
Exactly. Tinder.
Yeah, so I feel you could have two sets of friends and some overlapping friends, the virtual friends, the real life friends, and maybe some of them will overlap. There's a question also from Osama Hassanein, the world famous and biggest supporter of entrepreneurship in this region. So Osama wants to know how Silicon Valley mentors can help MENA entrepreneurs in fundraising. So maybe Mohammed Afifi that we had earlier from Egypt should reach out to Osama to get in touch, and to Tekwadi also to get in touch with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to help him in his fundraise. And this maybe could happen through this platform. I think more than ever they will be able to help, because it has become probably more natural to reach out to people who are remote and far from this region. So we'll make sure, Osama, we use your network and your skills as a mentor also for the benefit of our entrepreneurs. Another question on the future of the office real estate market. So the future of the office real estate market by Rassan Tayoun. I have to say that I've always been very pessimistic about commercial real estate and about office real estate. The first was impacted by the drop in shopping malls because of online sales and online retail. Now it will be even more affected because of COVID and social distancing rules. And when it comes to office real estate, I think people will also rethink that. So although I'm an optimist by nature, I'm having a hard time being optimistic about the office real estate space, except if you're really positioned into startup real estate and the businesses of innovation.
I think this is a chance for the WeWork model to actually work. The flexibility of office space, growing, breathing as needed. I think that's going to be the future. Having fixed large office spaces doesn't make sense. A large footprint rather than a breathing footprint is the question. So
we have another question from Saeed Ferry. Forgive me if I don't pronounce the name well. If we think that the future trend for VC is socially oriented, I guess, or SDG goals, and what's the future size of impact investing in MENA? So it's an interesting question. I'm having next Wednesday, the 20th of May at 11 a.m. Dubai time, a conversation with Muhammad Yunus, if you want to join that. I'll also maybe send the link to be shared on this to comment on his op-ed regarding the zero ROI investing. And of course, the double impact, so no financial ROI, but an impact ROI in terms of investing. I think it's a very interesting question. I'm quite sure some investors will opt for that as opposed to pure philanthropy. I think the philanthropy allocation could go into what is called impact investing. And then on the other side, the for-profit allocation will need to have more of a double bottom line in terms of impact to the environment. What are you doing for your community? So we cannot continue, business as usual in the for-profit world. So I guess the answer to that question is a bit mixed, but I invite you to join this discussion with Muhammad Yunus next week.
And I think sustainability is key to everybody in the world. We've seen, I think Muhammad Yunus says this very clearly. Gore, if the COVID crisis hadn't happened, we were already at a tipping point where the next 10, 20 years would have reached a point where the world is threatened by environmental issues. So I think sustainability across the world, whether it's at a government level, large corporate level, at a family level, at the children level, I think most children at the between the age of 5 and 15 are very careful on the use of plastic, on every other aspect. So sustainability remains a key part of a KPI for all future firms. And I think it will be a reported KPI, which financial analysts and others would look at, not just profits.
So another very interesting question from Khairuddin Lazarev. The most important cause of the virus outbreak is miscalculation and distrust of the prediction tools and the AI tools in general. So will we see a change from decision makers to startups working on AI prediction? So I think this this is an interesting question because it raises not just, you know, the trustworthiness of AI and of the new tools we have, but also how we handle and manage fake information and false information. And so in a non-digital world, I would say we need to have our own, to form our own judgment and use critical thinking to distinguish between fake information from real information, and then within the real information, reliable real information, and something that's likely to happen from something that is not. It's very difficult to answer. I mean, WHO said that this is going to be a global pandemic back in January. Did we all believe that? Probably not. So I guess for day-to-day information and something that is coming into the business as usual stuff, we can rely a lot on AI prediction. But then once it comes out of the ordinary, I would say there will always be probably mistrust to artificial intelligence, and we will need to rely on more human judgment. So I would say for the time being, using AI tools for business analytics and day-to-day questions is probably more likely to remain as opposed to the larger issues.
So I have quite an extreme perspective here. When I was at university in 1990, you know, there were no mobile phones, etc. So I was born in Kenya. I was at university in England. So, you know, when my parents were going to call me on a fixed line, I had to wait at a fixed line at a particular time. And that was pre-agreed through post that, you know, we will call you at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, etc. And that was the way things worked. You know, if you were to meet somebody, you turn up on time and you try to, and then you wait for hours in case they're late, and you stress whether the message was there, etc. That doesn't exist anymore because of the simple handset, right? So the innovation we saw because of mobile phones was substantial. The future innovations is all going to be driven by machine learning and AI. The speed of thinking, the speed of decision making, of why we do certain things, the frictions that we have on simple things like KYC, etc., will go away because of AI, which means future innovation is going to be lifted up, and that's coming no matter what. There's enough investments going into that forum, and we can't stop that.
Yeah. So looking at the poll, because we have the answer to the question, will you change your behavior after this crisis? There's an overwhelming response. We will have a new understanding of what a normal life is, with 52%, and another 30% that is saying that it will take a long time before we go back to a normal life. So about confirming, of course, the intuition we had. But yeah, I would encourage everybody to take this time to rethink also within their business what they would do, and maybe we can do as MIT Enterprise Forum, and as part of our next year reporting impact with Roland Berger, a survey of what people changed in their business as a result of this crisis. I think it would be an interesting perspective to have, and especially to survey this and have the angle of the startups into how they answered this question in the current times.
I think there's one story, which is most of the startups, most of the new companies were created by engineers who understood technology. What the crisis has created is it's created the older, the younger, the non-engineers, the less technically able to get involved, because they had to use Zoom and they had to use technology to go about doing the day-to-day stuff. The grandmother is ordering shopping online or grocery online. You know, that's happened overnight. And so transformation, technology transformation, digital transformation, people behavior transformation in the last 2 months is so substantial that it can go back to normal, because they're suddenly used to things that they weren't doing for 20 years, 30 years, that they would have taken a long time to do. So I think that's going to change, and it'll mean there's a wider audience, more diverse people engaged in the digital economy now.
Yeah, so Kushal, I think we're going to start wrapping up. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and for their questions. But many other questions we didn't answer, but one that I feel like answering is about, will we change the way judges judge the startup competition for next year? I have to say we haven't thought about it in terms of the criteria that we will be using, and we'll definitely need to rethink that. But in terms of the modalities of how they judge, all of our judges already judge remotely. So the platform is already remote, so that should not change. So I would like to remind you of the very important appointment of June 24th at 4 p.m. for the final award ceremony of the MIT Enterprise Forum Arab Startup Competition. I hope we'll see many of you. And for the Muhammad Yunus conversation next Wednesday, I'll tweet the link or maybe make it available on the MIT Enterprise Forum webpage. But for now, I have to say I don't have it at hand. I need to look for it, but it's at 11 a.m. Dubai time on Wednesday, the 20th of May.
And then all of you can download the report. I think there's a link that's been sent by the team on where to download the report. By the way, the more statistics we get back from you, the more we can leverage that to lobby all the governments for support, etc. So post it, send it to us, send us the impact that you're creating, how many employees, how your case studies, because your case studies are what makes reading, what makes the news carry, what makes governments wake up. So share your case studies through LinkedIn and other means. We love them, we want them, and we're going to use that to lobby the rest of the world.
And on that, a big thank you to Roland Berger, because in a region where there are very few statistics, I mean, we love this partnership with you. So thank you for making this collaboration and producing this report that provides incredible insights about entrepreneurship and startups in the region. Thank you. Thank you, Kushal.
I'll give a shout out to my team that did that, because they're the guys who build it. So as usual, we stand up, we present, but the team behind it deserves most of this. So Peter and Karim and Sharif and sorry, I can't list them all, but they're in the report. So thank you so much, and also from your side.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.